They didn't let me speak at my own son's funeral, said it would confuse the mood, said my grief was too complicated. I sat in the third pew. No one offered me the front row. His father's family made sure of that. The flag on his casket didn't shake, but I did. Not from weakness. From restraint. From all the words I couldn't say. The service dragged on in practiced silence. The chaplain spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of peace. But no one said he had a mother. A mother who trained soldiers before she was told she didn't belong. Before she became the shame they wouldn't name. My name, Denise Holloway, wasn't printed in the program. They listed me only once, as next of kin, not invited to speak. My hands were still. But my heart screamed, would you have walked out? Or stayed? Just to honor him quietly. After the service, I waited near the stone fountain by the side chapel. People passed me without eye contact. Some nodded. Others just, looked through me. My ex-husband stood beside his new wife, smiling for a photo like it was a high school reunion. I didn't cry. That would have made it easier for them. Easier to call me emotional, unstable, dramatic. I just stood there. Still in my uniform, still invisible. Until the stranger arrived. A tall man, late 40s, uniform crisp, eyes steady. He walked straight toward me, no hesitation. Ma'am, he said. And then he saluted, sharp, measured. A sound cut through the silence like folded steel. I blinked. No one else moved. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded paper. It's from Luke, he said. He asked me to deliver it. If he didn't make it home. I couldn't breathe. My son. That envelope burned in my hand. It was real. His handwriting, his seal. A letter I never knew existed. You should read it at the ceremony next month, the man said. The national one. The Pentagon already approved you as speaker. I stared at him. Are you sure? He nodded. Luke insisted. He said, make sure my mother gets the last word. If your voice was erased at your child's funeral, would you stay silent or let the truth speak later? I buried my truth long before I buried my son. Luke was 27 when they brought him home in a flag-draped casket I wasn't allowed to touch. Until someone signed off the chain of custody. But the silence. That started long before the war. I was 32 when I had him. A single tour left in my rotation, a silver star tucked in a drawer, and no husband in sight. Jack, his father, was a charming civilian with kind eyes and a temper he saved for quiet moments. We didn't last, but Luke and I, we became a unit. He was born during a thunderstorm at Fort Benning Hospital. I still remember the smell. Sterile antiseptic and fresh rain. He came out fists clenched. Like he already knew the world might not be gentle. At 6 months, he'd grab my dog tags like they belonged to him. At 4, he lined up his toy soldiers with perfect alignment. At 9, he saluted my boss. Without laughing. I never pushed him toward the military. But I never pulled him away either. Jack blamed me for that. Said I programmed him. But how do you explain a child who wanted to serve because he watched you limp home from Iraq and said, if you did it hurt, I want to do it strong. I told him the truth, service doesn't always look like medals. Sometimes it looks like chronic back pain, missed birthdays, and silence at dinner tables that used to be full. He still enlisted, and I still supported him. Because Luke never asked me for approval. Only honesty. And he knew I'd never lied to him. Jack remarried when Luke was 12. His new wife, Colleen, ran a bakery in Raleigh and believed every woman with a spine was hostile. They sent Luke birthday cards signed, but never called. At Christmas, he got a gift card to the mall. No message. Not even a note about school, sports, life. But when Luke made staff sergeant at 25, suddenly they wanted a photo. For the family wall. Hayes doing so well, Colleen had written on Facebook, beneath a post full of misspelled hashtags and cropped images. She didn't tag me. She never did. Jack told people Luke joined the military to honor the Holloway legacy. That side had one uncle who served in supply logistics and came home early due to allergies. I didn't argue. I was used to being erased. Luke never said much about it, but I saw the way his mouth tightened whenever Colleen tried to hug him. You don't have to be grateful, I once told him, for people who only show up when you shine. He nodded slowly, then said, but you always showed up when I didn't. That stuck with me. Still does. When Luke got deployed the second time, he sent letters, real ones. Handwritten, even when email would have been easier. I miss your Sunday chili? One note said. Tell the neighbor's dog I said, hi. But when the army car pulled up in front of my driveway, it was Jack's voice that told the reporters he was the grieving father of a fallen hero. He didn't mention I was still in uniform. Didn't mention Luke had written me every single week. And when the funeral arrangements began, Colleen was suddenly in charge. Barbara, Jack's sister, booked the chapel. I wasn't asked to contribute, just told the date. Just told what not to wear. 2 days before the service, Colleen called me from a blocked number. I almost didn't pick up. Her voice was thin, sweetened with effort. I just wanted to confirm your seating. You'll be at row D, right aisle. We're trying to keep things orderly. Not close to the family. Not front row. Just orderly, I asked. Will I be speaking? A pause. A throat clear. With thought maybe Jack should speak. He's handling it better. Better, like grief was a competition. Like silence meant strength, and I'd lost the right to cry. Because I didn't do it their way. Luke was my son too, I said. My voice didn't shake. Yes, she replied. But let's not make this about the past. I hung up, not out of anger. Out of survival. That night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in an old army sweatshirt Luke had left behind. The sleeves still smelled like detergent and desert heat. I held a framed photo of him at boot camp. Grinning, exhausted, proud. And I whispered, they think I made you up. Like you belong to someone else. A car passed. Then another. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the hum of cicadas and my breath. I stared into the dark and felt something unravel. Not rage. Not sorrow, something older. Quieter. Like the final strand of a rope giving way. I wasn't losing him. I was losing my place in his story. And somehow, that cut deeper than the casket. Have you ever been erased? Not by strangers, but by the people who should have stood beside you. 2 weeks after the funeral, someone from Jack's side called me by mistake. I heard their voice freeze when they realized who answered. Oh, Denise. We, meant to reach Colleen. Then the whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. She's the one who staged that photo, remember? Click. Line went dead. I stared at the phone, its screen still glowing like it owed me an explanation. Photo? Staged. I hadn't taken a single picture that day. I'd barely breathed. But later that week, someone sent me a screenshot. Luke's casket, surrounded by family. Colleen had cropped me out. Literally. My uniform sleeve was still barely visible in the corner. A stray bit of navy blue and silver stars. But the caption read, "A perfect goodbye, with the people who mattered most." People who mattered. Not mothers. Not me. That post had over 600 likes. 300 comments. He always looked up to his dad. Such a brave young man. Colleen, you raised him well. Raised him. She entered his life when he was in braces. But no one questioned it. No one asked where his mother was. The emails started next. Some anonymous. Others with names I used to recognize from Christmas parties and graduation cookouts. Maybe if you'd been softer, he wouldn't have needed the military. I heard you pushed him into the war, just so you could wear that uniform at his funeral. One message simply said, "Shame makes people desperate for medals." I deleted them. All of them. But not before they sank into my bones. At the grocery store, someone I used to teach CPR with saw me in line and turned her cart around. At the post office, a woman tapped my shoulder and asked if I was the one who faked the Pentagon request. I didn't answer. Just turned back toward the clerk, hands shaking as I signed for a package I no longer remembered ordering. But it wasn't just strangers. It was the church ladies who suddenly stopped replying to my group texts. It was the neighbor who used to bring me peaches every July, now waving from a distance but never walking over. It was silence that wasn't empty. It was chosen, curated, deliberate. I started walking in the evenings. Late, after the streets emptied and the porch lights dimmed. Just me, the rhythm of my steps, and the sound of a world pretending I never existed. I thought about writing a statement. Something quiet, dignified, not defensive, just honest. I opened my laptop, drafted a few lines, deleted them, wrote them again. But before I could post it, my inbox pinged. It was from a reporter at the local station. Subject line, comment request funeral controversy. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. Even the subject line carried accusation. Controversy. As if grief had become scandal. As if mourning needed to be managed. Later that night, I got a call from Sergeant Darnell. He served with Luke in Syria. Soft-spoken. Steady. Called me Mayim. Even before Luke outranked him. "Wanted you to hear it from me," he said. "There's talk." "What kind of talk?" He hesitated. "Someone saying Luke inflated his record. That you pulled strings for awards. That may be you." I stopped him. My voice didn't rise. But something inside me did. "Darnell," I said, "if I ever used Luke's name to get anything in this world, it was a seat at his funeral." He was quiet. Then he said, "I know. I just thought you should be aware." Click. Silence again. That word, or where. Not safe. Not protected. Just informed. It felt like standing on the edge of a minefield and being handed a map with half the lines missing. I started sleeping with the light on. Not because I was afraid of who might show up, but because I didn't trust who might not. And still, I said nothing. Because deep down, I was still hoping someone would say something for me. That Jack would finally speak up. That Colleen would call and apologize. That someone, anyone, would say she was his mother, and she loved him. But no one did. Instead, they kept passing the same lie around like a tray of hors d'oeuvres at a party I wasn't invited to. I wasn't grieving the death of my son anymore. I was grieving the erasure of our story. The part where he was proud of me. The part where he left notes in my glove box before each deployment. The part where he asked me to pin his last badge, because, in his words, "None of them got me here. You did." But I didn't have proof. Just memories. And in a world obsessed with screenshots, memories mean nothing. Have you ever watched your truth get rewritten by people who never lived it? The first time I heard my name on the radio, I was folding laundry. A local talk show host, the kind that likes both sides of every tragedy, was discussing military fraud. And in some cases, he said, "We've even seen parents exaggerate their children's service for personal gain." A recent funeral in Georgia raised eyebrows. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. That week, a blogger published a deep dive into Luke's record. He called it Inconsistencies in Valor. As if courage had typos. He cited sources, mostly Reddit threads and a Facebook comment from someone who's to know the family. He questioned the date Luke received his commendation, suggested the ceremony was staged for optics. And then he published a quote from someone he called a former officer who once served under the mother. I read it twice, then a third time. She always wanted credit. Even back in Iraq, she cared more about photo ops than field ops. Wouldn't surprise me if she pulled strings for her son's ribbons too. No name. But I knew the voice. Major Brent Keller. We'd served in the same field hospital in Mosul. I once stabilized him after a blast ripped open half his squad. He lost 2 men that night. I lost hearing in my left ear for 3 weeks. He sent me a thank you letter, then ignored me for 5 years. Now he'd offered me up like gossip at a bar. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Denise, he said, like we were old friends instead of barely acquaintances who once blood in the same sand. Why? I asked. Just that. He sighed. You know how the press is. They want drama. I gave them a quote. Didn't think it'd blow up. You questioned my integrity. My son's sacrifice. It wasn't personal. I swallowed hard. Of course it was. You used my name to buy yourself relevance. He didn't reply. Don't ever speak for me again, I said. Especially when I'm the one who kept you breathing long enough to run your mouth. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking, but my spine wasn't. That night, for the first time in months, I opened Luke's final email. The subject line read, "Just in case you ever need to remember." Luke's final email wasn't long. Just 3 paragraphs, typed at 2:14 a.m. The timestamp still stung. He'd sent it from a base near Kobani. Fee was patchy. But his words came through clear. Mom, if anything ever happens, I need you to know something. He talked about paperwork. Something he'd submitted. Something official. I sent it through the right channels, he wrote. They said it would be reviewed by command. It's for you. Only for you. It's my way of making sure you're not erased. I searched my inbox for a follow-up. Nothing. No auto reply. No confirmation. Just silence. I contacted a friend, Lieutenant Sophia Grant. We'd served together in Ramadi. Now she worked admin at the Pentagon. I called her personal line. Explained everything. She didn't interrupt. Didn't say I was overthinking. She just said, "Send me Luke's service number," and the date he mentioned. 3 days later, she called me back. Dennis. A pause. I looked everywhere. Nothing in the system. No pending memos, no flagged documents from his file. I blinked at the ceiling fan spinning above me, suddenly too loud. What about backups? Even the backups. If he submitted anything, someone scrubbed it. Her voice was careful, like walking across glass. But why? I asked. Why would anyone erase that? She sighed. Sometimes it's easier for them if the soldier stays silent. Especially when the request makes them uncomfortable. I didn't sleep that night. I laid on the couch in Luke's old sweatshirt, staring at nothing, the glow of my laptop screen casting shadows on the walls. The next morning, I drove to the regional army office. 2 hours north. No appointment. No warning. I asked for the officer in charge. Waited in a beige hallway that smelled like cheap coffee and policy. A young sergeant finally called my name. Mom, follow me. The captain I met was polite, cautious, distracted. I understand you're inquiring about a document that may or may not exist. No, I said. I'm inquiring about a document that my son said did exist. He pulled up a screen. Showed me Luke's file. It looked clean. Too clean. Everything was pristine. Standard, generic. Not a single note that hinted at anything personal. Nothing that looked like Luke. He closed the folder. We're not seeing anything irregular. Of course not. Because you only see what hasn't been buried. I walked out. Sunlight slapped my face, hot and sharp. I stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes, just breathing, trying to remember what Luke's voice sounded like when he said the words, "It's for you." That night, I printed out the email. Just in case they came for that too. I didn't realize how alone I was until the lawyer stopped returning my calls. He wasn't mine, exactly. He was Jack's. From the divorce, 15 years ago. But back then, he'd said, "If you ever need anything, Denise, call me directly." So I did, twice. Left voicemails, wrote a short email. Nothing. The silence felt familiar. But this time, it had paperwork behind it. I walked into the local legal aid office the next week. Explained everything. The erased record, the blocked testimony, the defamation. The woman behind the desk tilted her head politely. "You're not next of kin," she said. Not a question. A declaration. "I'm his mother." She tapped her screen, but the army file lists his father as primary contact and Colleen as spouse, equivalent. Spouse, equivalent. I repeated. They weren't married. They registered as domestic partners for benefits during active duty. Legally, she holds next of kin authority. I stared at her, not angry, not yet, just emptied. "What can I do then?" She paused. "You could petition for recognition. But it may not go anywhere. Especially posthumously. Even if I have his emails." She sighed. "Emails aren't affidavits." I stood up slowly. "Thank you for your time." Outside, the heat pressed against my chest. Dry. Close. Unrelenting. The courthouse steps felt higher than usual. And my name felt smaller. That night, I went through old boxes in the attic. Photos of Luke. In his science fair goggles, at his first camping trip, clutching a fishing rod twice his size. A report card with a handwritten note. "Luke is respectful, focused, and brave. Just like his mom." I held that paper for a long time, long enough for the ink to blur in the dim attic light. Then I found the envelope. One I'd forgotten. Still sealed. Luke's handwriting on the front, "For when you need to remember." I didn't open it. Not yet. Not while I was this raw. I held it to my chest, sat on the attic floor, and tried not to cry. Because even tears felt like they could be used against me. Because somewhere, someone was still calling me dramatic. Still calling me a liar. And I was tired of defending what any mother should never have to defend. That I was there. That I raised him. That I mattered. I waited 3 days to open the envelope. Left it on my nightstand, beside a photo of Luke in his dress blues. I couldn't bring myself to tear the seal. Not because I was afraid of what he'd written, but because I already knew. And reading it would make it real. On the third night, I lit a candle. No reason. Just instinct. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the old ceiling fan and the soft clink of the spoon in my tea. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly, like it might crumble in my hands. Inside was one sheet of paper. Lined. Folded once. The ink had bled slightly at the edges. He must have written it fast. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means something happened, and I'm sorry for that. You were the one who taught me how to stand straight even when the ground shifted. So I'm asking one thing. Tell them who I was. Even if they don't want to hear it. Tell them I was a soldier, yes. But I was also your son. That I made breakfast every Sunday and sang too loud in the car. That I once cried over a broken turtle shell and never told anyone but you. Tell them I didn't die to make anyone proud. I served because I believed in something. And I believed in you. Don't let them bury your voice with my body. Promise me that." I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the letter back carefully. Pressed it flat. slid it into a new envelope and tucked it into my wallet. It stayed with me after that, everywhere I went. Even if no court would hear it, even if no record would acknowledge it, I had my proof. My purpose. Luke had asked me to speak. And I would. Even if it was to an empty room. Even if it was just me and his picture and a microphone no one turned on. Because silence wasn't working. Because pain left unspoken turns into shame. And I was done being ashamed. I started by writing one letter. To the Department of Veterans Affairs. Then another. To the press liaison at the base. Then a third. To the Pentagon's ethics office. I wasn't asking for recognition. I was demanding a record. Of a mother. Of a son. Of a promise made between two people who didn't need headlines to be real. That week, I put on my old uniform, tightened the collar, straightened the bars, and I looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time in months, I didn't see a problem to solve. I saw a woman no longer willing to be edited out. You can call me anything you want, but you will not call me invisible. The first envelope I sent out didn't feel like much. Just one printed letter, 3 copies of Luke's commendations, and the email he wrote me, the one titled, "Just in case you ever need to remember." I mailed it certified, tracked, signed for, to the Pentagon Public Records Unit, to the Ethics Committee, to the base commander's office, where Luke had last served. I didn't expect replies, but I wanted them to know. Someone was paying attention. The next day, I called an old contact, Captain Lila Tran. She ran comms in Luke's unit and had once written me a birthday card when Luke forgot to mail mine on time. I still had it, folded behind a photo of Luke at 10 with braces and a mustard-stained hoodie. Leela picked up on the second ring. Denise. Her voice was warm, tired, but real. It's been a while. I know. I wish I were calling with better reason. She didn't interrupt. Didn't offer platitudes. Just listened. I told her everything. The funeral, the redacted file, the rumors. She exhaled sharply. I heard about the funeral, she said. Someone posted a photo. But I didn't know they'd cut you out. I just assumed that I was there, that you were treated like a mother. We were quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Denise, you need to talk to Sergeant Willis." Willis? Hayes, the one who processed Luke's final paperwork. He saw the letter. My breath caught. You're sure? I am. He mentioned it over lunch one day. Said it was the only time he'd seen a soldier request a posthumous statement for their parent. Do you have his contact? I'll send it. The text came through before we hung up. A number. A town. A name. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid on the couch, Luke's sweatshirt across my chest, and whispered the words. Okay, baby. We're not done yet. Sergeant Willis lived 2 hours away, just outside Macon. I didn't call. Didn't text. I showed up. Unannounced. His house sat at the end of a quiet road, flag by the porch, bike in the yard, screen door creaking in the wind. I stood there for a long minute, hand raised but not knocking. What if he didn't remember? What if he lied to protect himself? Then I thought of Luke. And knocked. A woman opened the door first. Mid-30s, curious eyes, baby on her hip. Yes. I'm looking for Sergeant Willis. I served with his old CO. My name's Denise Holloway. She blinked. Then smiled softly. You're Luke's mom? I nodded. She stepped aside. He talks about your son a lot. Inside smelled like cinnamon and something baking. Pictures lined the hallway. Unit photos, framed medals. A grainy print of soldiers playing cards in the dirt. Willis sat at the kitchen table, wearing a faded army tee and the kind of expression that tightens before it softens. He stood, held out a hand. Ma'am. I shook it. Firm. Grounded. Thank you for seeing me. I should have called you first, he said. I didn't think anyone wanted to know. I do. My voice didn't shake. It didn't have to. He gestured for me to sit. I processed Luke's final requests. There were 3. I leaned in, heart beating like a fist in my throat. One was a sealed letter for a friend. One was to donate part of his life insurance to an education fund. And the third. He looked up, a memo to command, requesting that his mother, his words, be allowed to speak at my national memorial, should the worst occur. I blinked. He kept going. He said, she taught me to serve. She deserves the last word. I swallowed. Where is it now? He hesitated. I filed it. Same day he sent it. But a week later, my CO told me it was being handled. Did you ever see it again? No, ma'am. He rubbed the back of his neck. I asked once more. They said it was not standard protocol. Told me to let it go. But you didn't. No, he said quietly. Because Luke mattered, and so did his wishes. I left Willis's house with more than answers. I left with fire. Not rage, clarity. The kind that burns clean. Luke had tried to protect my place before he ever left the earth. And someone made sure that protection vanished. They thought I'd fold. Disappear. Grieve quietly, as instructed. But now I had proof, not in paper, but in people. Willis said, if you need me to say this out loud, I will. He meant it. So did I. That night, I recorded a video. No makeup, no uniform, just me, sitting at Luke's desk, his nameplate still nailed to the wood. I pressed record. And I spoke. My name is Denise Holloway. I'm the mother of Staff Sergeant Luke Holloway. I wasn't allowed to speak at his funeral. But I'm speaking now. I told the story. Not for sympathy, but for record. About the erased memo, the rumor campaign, the cropped-out photos and closed doors. I held up his email. Read the lines slowly. Tell them I believed in you. Don't let them bury your voice with my body. Then I ended with one sentence. If the system won't acknowledge me, then the world will. I posted it with shaking hands. Then closed the laptop. Made tea. Sat in the quiet with no expectations. It hit 3,000 views before sunrise. By noon it was on military forums, widow support groups, and veteran Facebook pages. Women started messaging me, mothers, sisters. I wasn't allowed to speak either. They called me hysterical. They rewrote his legacy and erased mine. I read every message. Eyes burning. I wasn't the only one they'd tried to silence. And if I had to be the first to speak this loud, so be it. Have you ever realized your grief wasn't yours to hold quietly anymore? Would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or speak truth to reclaim your place? Let me know below. I'm listening now, and I know I'm not alone anymore. The invitation came in a plain envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just my name, typed in all caps. Denise Holloway inside a folded letter, bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. It was brief. Formal. Cold around the edges. But one sentence stopped me cold. You have been approved as a speaker for the National Gold Star ceremony. I read it twice. Then again. Approved. Not. Requested. Not. Considered. Approved. A second page listed the event time, location, and a contact number, but no mention of who submitted the request. I didn't need to guess. Willis. Or maybe Leela. Maybe both. I pressed the paper to my chest, breathed in deep, held it there. This time they wouldn't be able to crop me out. But it wasn't just about being seen. Not anymore. It was about what I would say when I finally stood at that podium. Because this wasn't a eulogy. It was testimony. And testimony, when spoken by someone who was silenced, is power. I started writing that night. Not a speech. A reckoning. Line by line, I built it like a field report. Direct. Unflinching. Detailed with intent. I printed out the emails, the Facebook comments, screenshots of articles that questioned my presence at my own son's burial. I organized them by timestamp. Labeled each one. I wrote Luke's name on the first page in bold. Then underneath it, mine. Not because I needed to attach myself to his worth, but because his story was never separate from mine. I wasn't walking into that ceremony as a grieving mother. I was walking in as a witness. I gave myself 5 days to prepare. Not for the speech. For the moment. The moment I'd walk past the cameras, through the guarded entrance, into a space that once tried to erase me. I didn't rehearse like a soldier. I rehearsed like a woman who knew every pause could land like thunder if held long enough. I printed my notes, then rewrote them. Twice. Every word had to cut clean, not to wound, but to expose. I practiced in front of the mirror. Watched my own mouth form the words they never let me say. I wasn't allowed to speak at my son's funeral, but I'm speaking now. I practiced standing still when my hands wanted to shake. I practiced pausing when I knew they'd want me to rush. My old uniform still fit, but I didn't wear it. I chose a dark blazer, simple blouse, a silver pin Luke had given me at his last promotion. I know it's not regulation, he said, clipping it on. But it suits you better than bars. I kept my hair down. No tight bun. No badge of obedience. I wasn't there to look decorated. I was there to look unedited. The night before the ceremony, I stood in front of Luke's photo and read the speech aloud. No one answered, but I felt something shift. Not outside, inside. The silence didn't choke me anymore. It steadied me. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Ready for the people who'd called me too much. Too loud. Too complicated. Let them hear what too complicated sounds like when it speaks into a microphone. The National Gold Star ceremony was held in a marble rotunda 3 blocks from the Capitol. Flags lined the columns. Every step echoed. Security was tight, but when I showed my ID, the officer looked up, then stood. "Mom," he said, and saluted. No sarcasm, no hesitation, just recognition. Inside, rows of chairs filled fast. Dress uniforms, medals polished, hands folded over programs. I walked past them slowly, deliberate, unapologetic. I saw Jack 3 rows back. Colleen beside him, eyes lowered. They didn't smile. Didn't wave. Barbara was there too. Her pearls were tight, but her jaw was tighter. Good. Let them all be there. Let them all hear. The moderator cleared his throat. Our next speaker is here today, not because she was asked, but because her son insisted. Silence fell. Then my name, Staff Sergeant Luke Holloway's mother, Ms. Denise Holloway. I rose. Took the podium. Rested both hands on the sides. The microphone caught every breath. And I began. I was told I couldn't speak at my son's funeral because my grief was too complicated. No one shifted. No one coughed. I'm here today not to simplify that grief, but to honor its truth. I spoke for 6 minutes. Not long, but long enough. I told them who Luke really was. I told them what he left behind, and what they tried to erase. I read the line from his email, the one I never forgot. Tell them I believed in you. When I finished, I didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. Only stillness, but then, a chair scraped. Someone stood. A man in full uniform. 1 star on his shoulder. Clean, shaven. It was Major Brent Keller. The same one who once gave that quote. The one who had questioned me. He stepped forward, cleared his throat, and raised his hand. He saluted, not casually. Not performative. A full, formal locked elbow salute. Then he said, loud enough for the back row to hear, I was wrong. Gasps, not whispers. Gasps. I met his eyes. Didn't flinch, didn't cry. I just nodded once. Let them all watch. What would you have done if someone who betrayed you finally stood beside you in public? Would you forgive, or wait for justice to finish her turn? The morning after the ceremony, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in, not from strangers, but from names I hadn't heard in years. Lieutenant Cara Samuels, Major Dean Norris, even Colonel Marquez, retired 3 years ago, but still sharp enough to know when the wind was shifting. They all said the same thing: "We saw you." It's about time someone said it. "I'm with you." The last message came from Leela. 3 words. Hey would have smiled. That one broke me. Not into pieces. Just open. Because for once, the story wasn't getting smaller. It was spreading. By noon, a clip from my speech was trending. Not the full thing. Just the part where I said, "Don't let them bury your voice with their shame." News anchors argued about it. Talk shows ran panels. One called me too angry. Another called me the voice military mothers needed. I ignored them all. Because I hadn't spoken to Trend. I'd spoken for Luke. But then the email came, from an address I didn't recognize. Department of Defense. Gov. Subject line: Request for congressional testimony. I read it 3 times. It wasn't spam. They were forming a review committee, investigating how next of kin decisions were made, especially in cases where non-traditional families were left voiceless. They wanted me to testify, live, on record, under oath. I stared at the screen, hands still. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. But now it could change everything. For the mother who only got a folded flag. For the widow who got replaced in a family photo. For every soldier who checked other, under, emergency contact, and was told that wasn't good enough. I hit reply. Yes, I'll speak. The Capitol hearing room was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, in tone. Brass nameplates. Wooden desks. Everything lined up like it had something to prove. I wore navy slacks. No uniform. No ribbons. Just the pin Luke gave me, pressed against my collarbone like a vow. The committee chair welcomed me with a nod, not a smile. Ms. Holloway, you have 5 minutes for your statement. 5 minutes. They gave me less time than Colleen had spent choosing her shoes for the funeral. Still, I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I adjusted the mic, breathed once, then said, "My son died a soldier. But I was the one asked to disappear." The room went still. I told them about the erased memo, about the letter Willis had processed, about the article that called me unstable, when all I'd done was refuse to be silent. I named no names, but every word landed. Because every senator in that room had a mother. Or had buried someone they didn't fully understand. I ended with Luke's words. She deserves the last word. And then I stopped speaking. I didn't cry. I didn't wait. I just let the silence do the work. They asked 3 questions. All procedural. All careful. One woman leaned forward. Ms. Holloway, would you support a formal policy allowing soldiers to designate multiple next of kin for funeral protocol? I met her gaze. I'd support anything that stops a mother from sitting in the 4th row of her own child's goodbye. She nodded. Slow. Deliberate. The hearing ended without applause. But as I left, someone in the back row stood. A young man, maybe 20, in ROTC cadet blues. He saluted. Eyes steady. I saluted back. This time, not as a soldier. As a witness who refused to vanish. The video surfaced 2 days later. It wasn't leaked. It was mailed to my house. In a padded envelope. No note. No sender. Just a flash drive and a single line written on the sticker, "For her." I plugged it into my laptop with shaking hands. The screen flickered. Then came his face. Luke. Not in uniform. Just a gray t-shirt, back against a metal cot. Camera slightly tilted. His voice was calm. Tired. Honest. Hey Mom, he said. If you're seeing this, it means the worst happened. But I need you to do something for me, okay? I didn't breathe. Didn't blink. He went on. You always told me truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a witness. So be that. Be the one who doesn't flinch when they try to pretend I belonged to someone else. He paused. Swallowed. They'll tell you it's protocol. They'll say they followed the rules. But grief isn't a filing cabinet. And you were never a side note. My hands clenched the armrest. Luke looked straight at the lens. If they ever try to cut you out, speak louder. Use my name if you have to, because if I earned respect in this uniform, it's because of you. He smiled then. Soft. I love you. And I trust you to finish what they don't want started. The screen went black. I sat there, in the blue glow of the laptop long after it ended. Then I uploaded it. Everywhere. By nightfall, it had 2 million views. A congressional rep reshared it with the caption, "Testimony can wear a t-shirt." News anchors didn't debate this one. They just played it. Luke's voice. Clear. Unbroken. The next morning, I got a call from the Department of Defense. A new memo was being drafted. A new policy. Luke's name would be on it. So would mine. And the last line of the proposal used the phrase he spoke in the video. Grief isn't a filing cabinet. The foundation started with one chair, not an office, not a desk. Just a folding chair in a church basement that smelled of coffee and stories no one wanted to tell twice. I called it the resilience table. Every third Thursday we met. At first it was just me and Leela, and a widow named Carmen who hadn't touched her husband's medals in 3 years. We didn't have rules. We had stories. They spilled slowly, like blood from old wounds that had scabbed too fast. One woman said, "They told me not to come to the burial. Said it would make his fiancée uncomfortable." Another whispered, "They edited me out of the base newsletter." I nodded. Because I'd lived it. And because silence was never neutral. It always favored the ones who wrote the script. The third week, someone brought cookies. The fifth, someone brought a friend. By the second month, we needed more chairs. And one day, a teenage girl showed up. Barely 17, holding a stack of handwritten letters. "My sister served," she said. "She died overseas." They didn't even spell her name right in the obituary. We let her rid. The whole room sat still as stone. No one interrupted. No one corrected her grief. That's what legacy looks like. Not perfection. Not plaques. But space. For the ones who've been told they're too complicated to honor. I didn't set out to build anything. I just wanted to keep a promise. But by spring, we had a website. By summer, we had a legal fund. And by fall, we had a waiting list. Not for grief counseling. Not for medals. For microphones. People wanted to speak. Not scream. Just speak. And finally, someone was listening. I visited Luke's grave on a Tuesday. No cameras. No press. Just me. The grass had grown in. The headstone was clean. But this time, there was something new. Someone had left a folded flag beneath a note that read, "For the mother who didn't flinch." I sat down beside it, ran my fingers across the carving. Staff Sergeant Luke Holloway, beloved son, resilient soul, no more missing words. No omissions. No edits. I didn't say much. Didn't need to. He knew. I stayed for an hour. Watched a bird land on the corner of the stone, then lift again, silent. The next day, I returned to the resilience table. The room was already full. A new face waited at the door. Young, early 20s, sleeves rolled, eyes unsure. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he'd come to the right place. "Is this?" he started, voice low. I nodded. "You're here." He didn't ask if he could speak. He just sat. That's how it works now. No permission slips. No proving your pain. Just a chair. And someone who'll listen. I sat beside him, pulled out Luke's old notebook, the one with coffee stains on the spine and folded corners he never bothered to flatten. I placed it between us. If you want, I said, you can start here. He didn't open it yet, just stared at the cover. Then whispered, was he really like the video? I smiled. Not big, just enough. No, I said. He was louder, and funnier, and so much messier. But yes, he meant every word. The boy nodded, looked around the room, then back at me. Do I need to say it perfect? I shook my head. No, you just need to say it true. And he did. For the next hour, he told us about a sister who'd been deployed, dismissed, and disappeared from her own base newsletter. He cried once. Only once. But no one moved to hush him. No one said, "You're being too much." Because here, grief wasn't something to bury. It was something to hand forward. When he finished, he reached for Luke's notebook, flipped past the first page, then paused. There, scribbled in Luke's handwriting, were 5 words. Speak loud, even when shaking. The boy smiled, then added his own line underneath. He didn't read it out loud. But I saw it when he left. They tried to unname her. So she named us back. Justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes, it walks in quietly and makes sure no one gets erased again. If you've ever been silenced, what helped you speak again? Comment below. You never know who's reading or who needs your truth tonight. Type 1. If you've ever felt invisible. Type 2. If you believe silence can become strength. The room was quiet, but I wasn't small anymore. Closure came not with applause, but with someone choosing to speak, even when their voice trembled. If you've ever had to fight just to be believed, tell me below. You are not alone. Every ending can be a new beginning.